I want to remind everyone to please mute your phones and your videos. We have a full agenda, and please wait until the end of the presentation to ask your questions. You can use the features in Zoom to raise your hand or post your questions or comments to the chat section to be recognized to speak. I'd like to have Secretary Pasqua to please read the statement of compliance.
Frank Conley. Wait, it can't be Frank.
Secretary Pasqua.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pursuant to Public Law 1975, Chapter 231, the Open Public Meetings Act, public notice of this meeting was filed on July 9th, 2020, and amended on December 11th, 2020, with the Office of the Secretary of the State of New Jersey and 3 newspapers, the Cherry Hill Courier Post, the New Brunswick Home News Tribune, and the Newark Star Ledger. Pursuant to Public Law 2020, Chapter 11, public notice of the meeting has been posted on the Rutgers website under Governing Boards. I'm going to now ask the members, you've all seen the agenda and the meeting materials posted on the Governing Board portal. Does anyone have a conflict of interest to disclose at this time? You can just raise your hand on the video and I'll scroll through. I do not see any. All right, Mr. Chair, we can continue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Pasqua. Next, we have the induction of a new member to the Board of Trustees. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Jonathan Bogushaw back to the board, having recently been appointed by Governor Murphy and confirmed by the Senate. Jonathan has served as a public trustee from 2010 to 2012, and we're pleased to have him back on the trustees. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you.
I will now proceed to have Jonathan inducted as a member of the board. I will ask Mr. John Hoffman, Senior Vice President and General Counsel, a member of the Bar of the State of New Jersey, to please administer the oath of allegiance and office. Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bogushaw, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Repeat after me. I, Jonathan R. Bogushaw,
I, Jonathan R. Bogushaw,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
and to the governments established in
and the governments established in
the United States and in this state,
the United States and in this state,
under the authority of the people,
under the authority of the people,
and that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly perform
and I will faithfully, impartially, and justly perform
all the duties of the office
all the duties of the office
of member of the Board of Trustees
of member of the Board of Trustees
of Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey,
of Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey,
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Welcome again. Okay, next I will like to welcome 2 student representatives of the University Senate. I'd like to welcome Ms. Nina Gall from the School of Arts and Sciences and Mr. Robert Wayne from the New Jersey Medical School. Welcome, we're happy to have you. Okay, so moving on, next on the agenda, we have matters presented by the president. I'd like to ask President Holloway to please address the board. President Holloway, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Quick confirmation you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. I've had connection issues today. So with apologies to some of the trustees who may have heard me make similar comments earlier in the day to the Board of Governors and to my senior staff, I proceed with my comments. I want to start by honoring the memory of Professor Emeritus Joseph Seneca, who died over the Thanksgiving weekend. He was an admired, respected, and beloved member of the Rutgers family, someone I must say I never had the honor to meet, but when I read his profile in Rutgers today, it's certainly clear as somebody I wished I had met. He was a former vice president for academic affairs, serving for 12 years during a difficult time in the university's history. He studied the New Jersey economy for more than 50 years and was an advisor to governors of both parties on economic trends. Through all of this, he was a close collaborator with Professor Jim Hughes, the former dean of the Blaustein School, in providing economic forecasts for our region. We salute his remarkable service to Rutgers and to the state. In the Board of Governors earlier today, 2 important naming opportunities were presented, endorsed, and voted upon and affirmed. One is the naming of 15 Washington Street in Newark for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a beautifully restored building, which was the law school for 2 decades. And Chancellor Nancy Cantor spoke in depth about the reasons we are eager and proud to name this building in honor of Justice Ginsburg. We also affirmed the naming of a new behavioral health center for Marlene Brandt. Marlene has a passion for mental health, especially in adolescence, which is always important, but heightened by these stressful times. She has given us what is the largest single gift from an individual in Rutgers history, and we are in her debt. Brian Strom presented on what will be the Brandt Behavioral Health Center, the first of its kind in the state that will help address a lack of support service focused on behavioral health. Very important steps forward for the university. Some very good news to share by Rutgers faculty and students. We have 4 members of the Rutgers faculty who've been inducted to the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Ken Irvine from the Waxman Institute of Microbiology for his work in developmental biology. Brian Strom of RBHS for his work in pharmacoepidemiology. Charles Weschler from the Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences Institute for his work on indoor chemistry and chemical fates. And Hui Xiong from Rutgers Business School for his work on data mining and mobile computing. I'm also pleased to announce that Camilla Townsend was awarded the Kundal History Prize for her book, the first history of the Aztecs based exclusively on texts from indigenous people of Mexico. And as I made clear when I made my remarks to the Board of Governors, working with this kind of source material is something that people thought was impossible as recently as the last 10 years. This is quite a breakthrough. We have a Marshall Scholar and 2 Schwartzman Scholars to announce. Marshall Scholar, Mai Ravichandran, SAS New Brunswick class of 2021. It's the 2nd year in a row we have a Marshall after more than 40 years without one. I'm very excited to see this trend continue. We have 2 Schwartzman Scholars, Julian Rosenblum from SAS New Brunswick class of 2021, and Malik Naibi, 2018 graduate of Rutgers Business School, Newark and New Brunswick. Last month, Executive Vice President Academic Affairs Prabhas Mogi and I announced a pass no credit option for undergraduates for fall 2020 grades. This was in consultation with provost and chancellors. This applied only to undergraduates and came with a strong caveat about seeking advising support before executing on that decision, because there are potential implications for going past no credit instead of receiving a grade. Limited for now to fall 2020, and Prabhas is in advanced conversations about the possibilities for the rest of the academic year. Searches are underway for the Camden Chancellor and for the Senior Vice President for Research. All is in order on these fronts, and review is beginning for Responsibility City Center Management Budget Model, chaired by Brian Ballantyne. Spring 2021 plans are being announced by each chancellor, still predominantly remote learning, but there'll be an increase in on-campus living. With that, my comments conclude.
Any questions for President Holloway?
I apologize. I know some of this was a repeat for all of you as well. I probably could have edited these down a little bit, but we're erring on the side of more details rather than fewer.
We appreciate that. We appreciate that. Any questions? Hearing none. Thank you, President Holloway.
Pleasure.
Okay. I will call your attention to the September 24, 2020 meeting minutes that were posted on the portal, and ask if there are any additions or corrections. I would like to inform the board that a member of the public has registered to speak on this action agenda item. The speakers will be allotted 2 minutes for comment and must speak to the agenda item they have signed up for. Mr. Charles Gradville, editor New Brunswick today. Sir, you may address the board.
Yes, thank you, sir, and thank you to all the board members. I am Charlie Cradaville, New Brunswick today. I'm a New Brunswick resident. Want to start by thanking the secretary for all the work that goes into the meetings. I think the governor's meeting went well today with Zoom, and I see this one's going well, and I know a lot of work goes into it, so I want to thank her for her work especially. And do want to wish you all a happy holiday. I know that I wasn't able to be at the last meeting, but this one is being streamed live on New Brunswick today, and would urge the board to look at the meeting procedures that you use and try to find more ways to connect with the public. And one way is recording your meetings and broadcasting them. So I'm happy to help with that, but would also like to see the board move in that direction and to foster more public comments. You may want to open up the rules for that to allow general public comments so people can talk about matters like the plan to demolish the Lincoln Annex School. I know I've spoken to you all about it, and I just hope when you're with your families this holiday season, you think about the 750 children that go to Lincoln Annex School and use your power as trustees to voice your concern, which I hope you share with me, about kicking the kids out of that school to expand Robert Wood Johnson Hospital for a Rutgers project. The New Brunswick Parking Authority has pulled out of this project. I would urge Rutgers to do the same. The trustees have a role to play here. And, thanks to good people who've been fighting the good fight, that school is still standing. And when students are supposed to go back in just a month or two, I hope you consider that these kids don't know whether they're going to a converted warehouse or to their school that they are comfortable with in their neighborhood. So I would encourage you all to think long and hard about this, and don't allow Rutgers' name to be used for something that can be so detrimental to so many young people, especially to their education. So thank you for the time to speak, and I do wish you all well. Happy holidays.
Thank you, Mr. Cradaville, and happy holidays to you as well. May I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Next, I will call your attention to the minutes of the December 3rd Executive Committee meeting, which has been posted to the board, and ask if there are any questions. Okay, hearing none. Next on the agenda, we have our continuing education section. And we have a presentation on instructional strategies resulting from COVID-19 pandemic, which, as you may recall, was an area of interest identified during the annual survey. I would like to have Dr. Garudi introduce the topic and the presenters. Dr. Garudi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So we do have a very interesting series of presentations planned for you today, but before introducing our guest speakers, I'd like to make you aware of an upcoming board activity that we have planned for you. Obviously, the COVID restrictions on group gatherings have curtailed our ability to have the very successful site visits of various campuses and different buildings and all around the campuses that you've all enjoyed in past years, but not to worry. Next slide, Pat. We have arranged for you a special virtual tour for board members only. It will be of the New Brunswick campus, and it'll be hosted by a live student Scarlet Ambassador. And it'll give you a chance to pretend you're back in high school and you're thinking about coming to Rutgers and you want to take a look at the campus in the age of COVID. So that's what we have planned for you. This will take place on January 13th, and it will, so I do ask you, please mark your calendars, January 13th. We've set it up for 6 to 7 p.m. because we are trying to accommodate more members who may be working, and this should be a little bit more convenient anyway. We'll be sending out more information as we get closer to the event. And just to let you know, also, we are working on other similar virtual tours for the Newark and Camden campuses. Okay, so now on to today's presentations. As you're all aware, the pandemic has presented unprecedented challenges to students and faculty alike in regard to how do you learn and how do you teach in this environment. But it has also provided opportunities for creative and new ways to meet these challenges. Next slide, Pat. So we are very fortunate to have with us today the provosts from all 4 of our campuses who are going to tell us about the strategies that are being employed throughout Rutgers today to overcome the challenges that teaching and learning in the pandemic has brought about. So I'm going to introduce you all together now, and then we'll proceed with your 10-minute each presentations. If I could ask you to please be very strict about the time limit because we do have a full agenda. So as you can see on the slide, from New Brunswick, we have Provost Francine Conway. From RBHS in Newark, Provost Patricia Fitzgerald-Bocarsley. From Rutgers Newark, Ashwani Manga. And from Rutgers Camden, Michael Palis. So Francine, if you are ready, could you please lead us off?
Thank you so much for making the time for this presentation and for having us. I'm very proud of the work of our faculty as they quickly transition to the innovative instructional strategies that I will share with you today. I must say the response from the faculty has been overwhelming, but I'm only showing you a representative sample of some of the work that they have done. While students reported that the move to remote instructions was disruptive and adversely impacted their learning due to COVID, most reported that the instructors offered an effective learning experience in their courses. And when you take these 2 student ratings together, what we see is that the instructors' effectiveness outpaced the adverse effects on students. Some testimonials from one faculty member acknowledged that while she was skeptical at first, the enthusiasm of her students did lead to mastery of the course materials. And similarly, the students reported that although there's a barrier in the physical connection, one student writes, "I do not think the online structure of acting limits the willingness and the work and understanding the techniques." From another faculty member in SAS, she writes that by partnering with the learning centers, she was able to provide the students in her course an enhanced learning experience. We'll go to the next slide. So our students learn best when their learning environments and the pedagogical approaches align. Prior to the health pandemic, teaching methods generally fall on a continuum of instructor-centered to student-centered approaches. But due to the health pandemic, a widespread inclusion of technology was necessary. And instruction still needed to be delivered on this continuum of not only teacher-centered versus student-centered, but high and low technology. And while instructor-centered learning is a more traditional approach, the inclusion of technology gave us a lot of opportunities to be creative and to deliver instruction in innovative ways. And just sharing with you some of the examples using this framework of high and low technology, teacher-centered versus student-centered. This is an example of a teacher-centered approach using low technology. And this comes from Professor Porter from SCBS. And she writes, "I made the Jell-O in a muffin pan to make it look like our agar plates. The feel is very similar." And she demonstrated microbiology streaking techniques using very thick salad dressing as bacteria. And the results really mimics what the agar plates would actually look like were the students in the lab. In another schools like the Graduate School for Applied and Professional Psychology and Business, these faculty use high technology. Sorry, I'm hearing a feedback. And what they propose doing, I'm sorry, I'm hearing a feedback.
Yes, we are. Can everybody please go on mute?
So thank you. So what the professors did was have the students use various technology to record themselves in either mock lecture situations. So for example, using Flipgrid. So using the Flipgrid technique, students' assignments and peer learning opportunities were recorded and then shared back with the class for teacher feedback on their techniques and their progress in the class. Next slide. Coming from our School of Engineering, one professor working with a cohort of 100 students, her course format emphasized problem solving, group learning activities, and integrating the course materials with an electronic textbook. So faculty have been very creative in their approach to delivering their instructions. In Mason Grove School of the Art, I've provided this link to the website that you can go to see how the students actually use film footage to draw and paint, scratch and bleach their footage, and then piecing it back together and displaying the images using the Zoom technology. Yet another example is the use of a platform called iNaturalist, where students were sent out into the field to look for unusual invertebrates, take pictures of them, and then record and catalog. And this material was then provided electronically to the entire class to see the work that students were doing. So very innovative work. And as I said before, I can't really get to all of them because they're all exciting and thoughtful and has really stimulated student learning to the point where these techniques are probably going to continue even when we return to our face-to-face situation. Let's move forward to slide 15. Keep going, a couple more slides. One more. So I'd like to say a little bit about the beloved community. So not only did faculty focus on the technique and the technologies and things that they were trying to teach our students, but they also cared for our students. One faculty introduced what she referred to as Breather Week. And this was a week where students were provided with opportunities for meditation, to kind of get caught up on their work, to do an assessment of where they are in their progress. And it was a very well-received intervention for her students. Another faculty creatively created what she called an empathy map that she displayed from her home. And as students provided feedback in these different areas, mapped on their emotions onto this physical map and then displayed it to the class. One more. Our faculty have also been very engaged in publishing about their teaching experience during COVID. And here I'm just showing you two examples of publications that were released by our faculty looking at teaching in a remote setting, teaching in the face of COVID. And I'd like to end with one last slide that just shows just a sampling of all the different technology that faculty have creatively integrated into their coursework. Again, the response from the faculty was overwhelming. And I have, although collected all of those responses, could not possibly begin to share them all with you. But I hope this gives you a good example of the efforts that our faculty have taken in ensuring excellence in teaching. So thank you.
Francine, thank you. That was content rich and concise. I appreciate it very much. We actually have about 2 minutes, and I'm going to break the rule we set up. We said we'd answer questions at the end, but if anyone had, we might be able to take one question for Francine, if there is one now. Otherwise, we'll hold until all the presentations are over.
Hey, Ron, it's Ron Wilson. Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. As a member of the Big Ten Consortium, all the different fields that we have, is there any effort to share best practices within certain fields? Like if I'm a historian, and this is new technology. There's everybody's got a better way of doing something. Is it possible for the different professors to find out who's doing it the best way? I mean, why reinvent the wheel if you found somebody else that's doing it better?
Thank you for that question, Ron. I think that's a great idea. We do have lots of connections with our Big Ten peers and colleagues. And throughout this pandemic, we have been comparing and talking about best practices in terms of delivering undergraduate education, as well as in other areas. So it makes sense to create an opportunity for faculty perhaps to have some communication and sharing of information. So I can definitely look into that.
Ron, this is Marty Gillis. Just wanted to request that maybe Patrick can get a hold of the link again for the film, because I tried going into that link and couldn't bring up the film. So very interesting presentation, Ms. Conway.
Yeah, we'll send it around.
Francine, thank you again very much. Let's move on now to Provost Fitzgerald Bocarsley from RBHS Newark. Patricia?
Hi, thank you for having this opportunity to tell you about RBHS in that era of COVID. Next. So RBHS has 8 different schools that are under the leadership of Chancellor Brian Strom. And I want to tell you about some of the challenges and successes that have been going on in several of our schools. I don't have time to cover every school, so going forward. So RBHS has a total of about 8,300 students. We have not seen any changes, significant changes in enrollment for this fall. Most of our programs are at the graduate level, about 75%. So that makes this unique from the other chancellor units of our students. But we do have School of Pharmacy, School of Health Professions, and School of Nursing that have undergraduate programs as well. The School of Pharmacy, actually, they transition after 4 years of undergrad to 2 years of grad and get their PharmD. Okay, next. So I'm going to start with the School of Dental Medicine under Dean Cecile Feldman. And one thing that applies to all of the schools is that the expected achievement of competencies have not changed and are very strictly governed by the accrediting agencies. So having to work under that constraint, having to still get their curriculum in. The lectures at the dental school were moved to all online, but examinations were done in person and having to break into sections to keep social distancing. Simulation lab, where dentists first are learning how to work on dental materials before they're working on humans, are now taught in sections and with virtual evaluation of projects. So we've had a lot of challenges of curriculum delivery across RBHS, especially in clinical curriculum. So for example, dental operatories where the students are learning to operate were all changed to a step-down COVID hospital unit for an extension for University Hospital between May and July. And this is an image. What used to be the training place for the students is now a hospital unit. In addition, working with patients who cannot be masked and they have mouth open and oral fluids is inherently dangerous. So we have to have our students and faculty all in extensive personal protective equipment. An important curriculum change was to team up 3rd and 4th year students when they're working on patients. It lowers the exposure time to unmasked patients, but also gives real opportunities for the students to learn from each other and is going to go on even beyond the COVID epidemic. There was also a reduction in clinical operatories by half to maintain social distancing, which extended almost doubling faculty hours that they have to spend with students. Next. So moving into the next term, we're going to continue, or they're going to continue with the 3rd and 4th year teams. showing great benefits, as I mentioned, and actually is a great stress reliever. And these are some more pictures of students in PPE. They're continuing to work on digital curriculum initiative and being careful to have a socially distanced curriculum. The next school I want to talk about is the School of Health Professions under Dean Gwen Hong. SHP has 40 programs with 12 different accrediting agencies. Some examples are physical therapy, physician's assistant, clinical nutrition, psychiatric rehab, and many others. So all the instruction was moved to virtual from March to mid-May, and all clinical rotations were halted in April as hospitals that normally hosted our students did not want students there, and that was true in all of our schools. Clinical skill labs and clinical simulations where they learn skills before going into working with real patients were able to start again in May, and here's such a skill lab. And clinical placements were restarted in June. So some of the challenge are that clinical skills cannot be effectively taught via video, and accrediting bodies don't accept simulation in place of direct patient care. And any changes to curriculum had to be approved for all of our entry-level programs by the accrediting agencies. Social distancing needs led to faculty teaching double sessions, in addition to the lost time. Some possibility for faculty burnout and challenges in parenting, as I'll mention a bit more. Next. So moving into spring, the faculty feels much more competent with their virtual didactic lectures. Clinical placements, however, remain a challenge because now all the students that weren't in hospitals, they now have to find spaces for them. And so they're double cohorts of students for clinical rotations, and that's complicated. In addition, with the surge, hospitals have been again removing students, leading to shortages of clinical spaces. The faculty workload is doubled, which is unsustainable, and there's been a lot of difficulty with individuals with young children, sometimes having problems balancing work and homeschooling their children, which you can imagine is quite difficult. Next. Okay, then the School of Graduate Studies offers PhD, MD, PhD, and other dual degrees and master's student programs. Some units have combined programs with New Brunswick or NJIT. In spring, almost all courses were moved to synchronous virtual with recordings available, very few classes meeting in person. So some of the problems have been isolation of students and adjustment to online courses and exams. That's proved quite challenging. There's a temporary closeout of all lab research except for COVID, or there was, except for COVID-19. And these are actually images of my students. So my graduate students working on our COVID-19 research. I'm an viral immunologist. There's limited occupancy of labs with return to research, so people have to schedule their time so that social distancing is maintained. And there was a need to bring back animal colonies, cell cultures, and limited access to clinical samples from clinics that weren't meeting. So in the spring of 2021, we'll remain mostly remote, but with still limited lab occupancy. And importantly, just this week, I've instituted weekly COVID testing. There was more sporadic before. Now it's actually weekly, which is going to help contain the pandemic. Next. New Jersey Medical School with Dean Robert Johnson, who is also the interim dean of Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. I'm just going to talk a little bit here. So all of the first and second year curriculum went to virtual, except for some optional anatomy and physical exam instruction. The so-called OSCEs, which are using standardized patients for the students to learn those skills, moved to virtual. And there were some clever innovations in virtual rounds in emergency medicine and psychiatry. Clinical rotations were temporarily suspended for 8 weeks for And all third and fourth year students learned the new techniques of telemedicine, and a new COVID course that I had the privilege of teaching in was given twice to the third and the fourth years. Healthcare changed really quickly, and with telemedicine becoming an essential component of healthcare. And so that gap in the curriculum was addressed by using the so-called tele-OSCEs for year 1 and 3 standardized patients. And they were able to get immediate feedback from patients, the standardized patients, and the residents. They received an RBHS Innovations in Education grant to support the development of this. There had to be some adjustments to rotation lengths through the various clinical areas, as well as timing of USMLE boards because of the lost time. The students in the class of 2020 were graduated early so they could join the COVID effort. So that was quite exciting. And for spring 2021, the remote learning is continuing, including OSCEs, but more in-person experiences, and of course, minimizing COVID exposure and regular testing. The School of Nursing is the last school I want to talk about, and they had interesting curricular adaptation. So faculty who had little experience in online education in 1 week moved 162 classes online. They were still online in fall, but with synchronous and asynchronous remote teaching. And they had a specialist who is an instructional designer to help teach the faculty how to adjust to this new environment. And they brought in a nationally known guest speaker. They too were affected by the hospital's counseling all clinical rotations this spring. And the fall clinical rotations have resumed, but in-person skill labs and simulations were reduced by 50%, again, leading to double time for the faculty. It's going well so far. Next. And the challenges have been exam administration difficult online, which has been common across many of the schools. Many undergrad students in particular lack a quiet home environment for study and learning, and may not even have good internet access. And faculty, staff, and students with young children sometimes have the challenges of balancing home and school. So for the spring, the curriculum is going to be pretty much the same with online and in-person learning. But importantly, undergraduate and nurse practitioner students will be very involved in the COVID vaccine campaign and generously providing their time. It's an all hands on deck effort and one of the most important public health initiatives in our lifetime. Okay. So to conclude, COVID-19 has dramatically affected all the RBHS units, but there were many commonalities and some unique challenges in the different areas. And I won't go through this again. Of course, the expanded testing week to weekly, at least weekly, in some cases more often, and rollout of vaccines are huge advances. And on the very positive side, much faculty and student resilience and creativity and incredible generosity have been manifested throughout RBHS, and we're really pleased with our students. Thank you.
Patricia, thank you very much. And I might just say here, while the challenges of teaching in the COVID environment are many for every academic department, I cannot imagine, as a physician myself, I cannot imagine what the professors, the clinicians, the students are doing here, because it's just different in clinical professions and in the healthcare professions. And there is going to have to be a lot of catch up going forward, I think, in the next couple of years for these young people. So kudos to everybody doing their best here. Next, I'd like to introduce Provost Ashwani Manga from Rutgers, Newark. And if we have any questions for Patricia, let's save them for the end too. Ashwani?
Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here. So I'm going to talk about remote teaching and learning at Rutgers, New York. And the reason I've split these two into teaching and learning is because one focus we had was on how instructors do the best they can in terms from an academic standpoint. But as far as students is concerned, as we all know, learning is not just about the academic aspect, it's also about all the other support they have, whether it's financial or technology and so on. So I'll talk about these different aspects. So when we started, when the switch happened, our deans, faculty, everyone stepped up quickly, and we were ready for remote instruction within just a couple of weeks. And of course, there was frequent communication with both faculty and students. And one key thing that we highlighted to our faculty through our deans was that we're not looking at just taking what we do in person and taking aspects of those and just deliver those that we can and forget about the rest. The idea was, how can we leverage remote teaching? How can we adapt and maybe do new things which help teach our students in new ways using the technology that we have. So I'm going to present a few of these examples of adapting. The first one is from a physical chemistry lab course. So this is usually done in the lab with a microcontroller circuit, which of course students could come into the lab, and the instructor in a very creative way had students build home-built microcontroller circuits using some open source platforms, using home products like food dyes and so on. A second one from structural geology. So the professor here would take his students on field visits. And this time, of course, again, it wasn't possible. So he went on a field visit on his own. So he put a GoPro camera on his head and went to, for instance, the Ramapo Fault and then he would actually measure things. He would actually take his, his equipment. He would measure things. Students would watch. It was like a virtual reality. It's available, online, and they could watch, and then they could do their calculations, and they could figure out, the measurements. In printmaking, we had students use car tires and kitchen rollers to transfer images onto paper. And many of the students here had comments on how they didn't even realize how it opened up, how everyday objects that they had in their homes could become ways to transfer images. For our painting classes, we had kits that were distributed at the beginning of fall, easels, canvases. We wanted everyone to be at the same page, have the same resources. And there were some phenomenal artists who the instructor brought in for these classes. In the writing program, we have lots of workshops, and this time, of course, they were asynchronous mostly, but they did incorporate lots of synchronous one-on-one tutoring sessions. And again, we received very positive feedback on these. One example from the business school, where the supply chain management program actually leveraged the PPE issues we were having from a supply chain standpoint, and students worked and looked at software on how these issues could be addressed. So, how can we make the best use of the crisis we were in? So some examples from the law school, and they did a lot during this time. One was they started based on a very successful Minority Scholars Program. They started a new Fellows of Academic Success program, in which high-performing senior students worked with the junior ones. And this was a huge help for faculty, as we were learning, working with technology, and students in some ways are ahead on how to manage chat, how to manage many other functions during remote teaching. And so this has been a huge success. A second one, and these are all examples from the live clinics that happen at the law school. And this is where students work on live projects with clients with help from faculty and the director of the program. So to give you a few examples of those, in the International Human Rights Clinic, so they actually leveraged this remote environment, having the, not to have to worry about time and travel flexibility, to launch a multi-institutional effort with the School of Dentistry, with New Jersey Medical School, and others. For our criminal and youth justice clinic, they worked with the Juvenile Justice Commission to upgrade Wi-Fi for attorney video calls. So there was a lot of back and forth, and because again, we wanted to make sure that they have the technology where we, our law school, could help them. And we did have the meetings. We had lots of virtual hearings, which were pretty successful. It says around 2/3 of the motions were granted. If you look at intellectual property, there were filings done with lots of filings done, as it always happens. But this time the difference was the faculty member used screen share to walk students through actual filings, and also allowed students to ask questions during the prosecution of these filings. And finally, one more example from our child advocacy clinic, where some had to be held in person, but they were mostly remote, and students represented clients in court, sometimes by phone, sometimes by Zoom, with faculty being in touch with them during hearings. And again, a lot of logistics involved here, but our faculty in the law school were able to do a great job in managing these clinics. Some examples outside of our, which are broader, not just within the schools. One is our honors living learning community, where they actually created a learning community for faculty. And there was a question asked earlier, and this is what we did here in terms of best remote practices for faculty. And of course, extensive use of technology for interactive group discussions, for cohort meetings. So essentially we did all the things that happen at HLLC, but using technology. Our Center for Pre-College Programs did an awesome job connecting with students and parents using phone and video calls. They even delivered stuff for students who could not come and pick up. They even delivered stuff, whether it was art materials, whether it was forensic kits, at their homes so that they could get started. There was a lot of virtual mentoring, and there was also a very successful summer conference with a virtual science fair. And this is the example where our Chris Agans, who manages our NJ STEP program, did an awesome job working with our Department of Corrections, because as you can imagine, there's no internet. It's not like they have the same facilities as our regular students do. And they created very creatively distance packets. They worked with the DOC there's a function, there's a program called JPay that's used by the DOC, which also has an email facility. And so they got permission to use that so that they could keep reaching their students. They even recalibrated their course offerings because many of the people on the inside have been facing trauma. And so the pedagogy itself was changed, was adapted so that it could be delivered, so that students could still keep learning despite the emotional toll they were under. In terms of our instructor support, there was, we have what we call a P3 collaboratory, pedagogy, professional development, and publicly engaged scholarship. And here we had, during the summer and which continued in the fall, multi-week mini courses. So we already have a collaboration with ACUE, Association of College and University Educators. And with that, we had lots of instructors. We had 71 faculty and PhD students who actually got credentialed, and just in this short period from summer to fall, taught 2,900 students. So this is just to indicate that the learning they had when they pivoted toward remote education, the learning they had has actually been used these last few months. We've also had lots of P3 workshops on remote instruction, many with help from our central TLT on effective teaching techniques and educational technology. About 200 of our faculty have participated in these workshops. Now, like I said earlier, student learning doesn't always happen, of course, because instructors are doing a great job from the academic standpoint, but also because students have the other support that they need. So we have worked hard to provide live chat through our Dana library, keeping it open as long as we can. We have streamlined our technology with what we call the Launchpad for issues of remote learning. For instance, we offered a program for free internet access. We loaned laptops, headsets, webcams at no cost to students. We had iPads for all entering students, both first year and transfer. And this was something we had been working on earlier, and it turned out to be a huge success during this time, which was working on progress reports. So in which there's like a check-in with faculty. And during this period, during this tough period, faculty could tell us about the student challenges, whether it was technology, whether it was non-attendance or anything else, and they could keep us updated through this platform. Barnes and Noble, something else which we were ready with. And then thankfully, during this time, it proved to be a boon, which was in terms of, we have a first day program for affordable textbooks in which online textbooks can be gotten at half the retail price. And because students were ready for remote learning, they were also much more amenable to go with this remote format of textbooks, which were much cheaper. Faculty were much more open for it. So again, this is something we were ready with, and it worked out very well during this period. Of course, our care team, there's been an increase in academic concerns, in personal concerns, and they've been working virtually. They've also leveraged the virtual format for new ways to manage, like this one, for instance, or VPVA, a new virtual room, which has objects for mindfulness, reading lists, and so on. Our Office of International Students and Services has worked extremely hard, especially given the changes we've had through the year. And they've also been working very closely with our deans, faculty, and so on. And finally, financial aid, where we've given about 6,300 awards of 9 million emergency funds in the fall. Our financial aid has done a fantastic job with in-person appointments as well as virtual ones, lots of town hall meetings to make sure people are aware of what we have to offer. So we have been working hard on these things. Of course, a lot more needs to be done, but we feel like we have tried to leverage our resources as well as we could during the summer, the fall, and starting from the spring. And now it's onward to spring 21. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Ashwani, thank you very much. It's really fascinating to see how different disciplines, different departments are coming up with these unique and creative ways to teach something that is specific for their individual units. Thank you. I'd like now to introduce from Rutgers Camden, Provost Michael Palis. Michael?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So for us on the Camden campus, as in other campuses, it was a very challenging semester, but it's one where we learned a lot. We learned that we can pivot and adapt on a moment's notice. We also learned that our students, faculty, and staff are resilient and are finding ways to make the most of the challenging environment that they find themselves in. At the same time, we continue to listen to our students about ways to better serve them during this pandemic. Next slide. Here's what our fall semester looks like. Like the rest of Rutgers, the Camden campus is predominantly engaged in remote instruction. Virtually all of our courses are remote, either synchronously or asynchronously. The only in-person classes that we have center around nursing clinicals, science labs, and studio art courses. Our dorms are at 25% of capacity to ensure social distancing and other health safety measures. We have instituted a laptop loaner program, just like the other campuses, that allows students to access their virtual classes at home or on campus. We've used the CARES Act funds to assist students who are experiencing financial hardships due to the pandemic. Over 400 students benefited from the direct emergency aid provided by these funds in the fall. Next slide. Now, one of the biggest challenges that we faced in the shift to remote instruction is how to effectively deliver large enrollment courses with over 100 students, because these courses necessarily will have to be done remotely because of social distancing requirements. And we don't really have very large classrooms on the Camden campus that can accommodate these numbers of students in a social distance manner. So one creative solution that was adopted by arts and sciences is to create multiple virtual sections of the same course and utilize the same asynchronous course framework or shell that contains the course materials, pre-recorded lectures, assignments and quizzes, and other course-related resources. So this is the advantage of ensuring consistent quality and content across the various virtual sections. Each of these virtual sections is assigned a section leader, typically a graduate student, which holds weekly synchronous sessions with students to review course materials and assignments and answer questions. And the section leader also assists in the grading for the course. Our nursing school also used a similar approach for their large clinical courses with recitation. I'm getting feedback. Each course assigned one or more course assistants who, in addition to
Hold on, Mr. Palace.
Provost Palace. Wilma, it's coming from your phone. Do you have two devices on?
I'll take care of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go on, Mr. Palace.
All right. So I was saying that the same approach was used by our nursing school. They use course assistants, and they, in addition to holding synchronous recitation sessions, are also provided tutoring and exam reviews and proctoring of exams. Now, in addition to the instructional strategies, we actually also made sure that our undergraduate students continue to engage in undergraduate research, because that's one of the hallmarks of Rutgers Camden. Now, it was difficult last spring because obviously due to the pandemic, it has to be done remotely, but our faculty found creative ways to make this happen. For example, in our biology department, Professor Nate Fried, pictured here on the slide, provided students in his course, Neuroscience of the Opioid Epidemic, with research kits so that they can do the lab component of the course in their homes. Now, each of these students, which are mostly first-year students conducting research for the first time, received a lab in a box, as shown in the picture, to set up a home laboratory to study pain and addiction in the common fruit fly. So the supplies, including the fruit flies, a microscope, pipettes, and other tools, allow the students to perform experiments as they would working in an on-campus lab. Similarly, in our psychology department, Professor Kristen August has students engaged in a research project to teach people with type 2 diabetes and their family members how to effectively communicate to help manage the disease successfully. So this project was run virtually through the Health Sciences Center in Camden, and also included participation from our School of Nursing. Next slide, please. So this year, despite the challenges of the pandemic, our students continue to receive national and international awards. Here's a list shown in the slide. Let me just mention one or two of them. So for example, Patience Williams, one of our MFA in creative writing students, is traveling to the Netherlands this spring to write, study, and teach on a Fulbright English teaching assistantship. And one other example here is, excuse me, our Rutgers Camden Civic Scholars partnered with the New Jersey Secretary of State, Tahisha Way, to launch the Project 555 voter registration program this early fall. And its aim was to actually register to vote high school seniors in every public school, 500 in total, and 55 of the largest private high schools in the state of New Jersey. So despite the pandemic, our students are really still achieving and still contributing to the community. And these are just a few examples of what our students have achieved in this fall semester. Next slide, please. Now, the transition to remote teaching was a radical shift for our faculty members and students. Now, we have an Office of Instructional Design and Technology called IDT, that was instrumental in helping our students and faculty move to this, really new platform of remote learning. Now, throughout the fall semester and continuing on to the spring semester, IDT is offering a series of webinars for full-time and part-time faculty that covers all aspects of remote and online teaching. Some of them are listed on the slide. In fact, just between July 1st and October 31st, IDT presented 65 online webinars with almost 200 distinct instructors attending. And in addition to that, the 3 instructional designers of the office have provided over 3,000 individual faculty consultations by phone, email, and web conference since July 1st, peaking at over 1,000 consultations just in August alone. Now, we had an e-learning conference held just last November where the faculty shared their ideas and best practice about remote learning. And it's actually our 7th e-learning conference. And it was a very productive conference because everybody was actually now doing remote learning. And so there was an exchange of ideas and everybody benefited from them. Next slide, please. Our Vice Chancellor for Student Academic Success, Jason Rivera, recognized that remote instruction prevents faculty from being able to gauge student problems as effectively as they could do in person. So he created the Are You Engaged initiative this fall, which employs analysis of Canvas and Sakai login information to help identify students who might be at risk, both academically and socially. A copy of Jason's report was uploaded to the board portal, so I encourage you to look at it. Just a summary of the few benefits of this project. So this project allows us to identify students at risk very early on in the semester. So for example, we identified over 450 students who were missing quizzes and or assignments. And over 260 of them have never even viewed the course syllabus since the start of the semester. So we use this information to reach out to these students via phone or email to make sure that they were okay and to connect them with the resources that they might need. In fact, we even deployed our employees who had time due to remote working and the nature of their jobs to conduct a phone call campaign to seniors and first-year students to do an academic wellness check-in. So students and parents actually express appreciation for the outreach. And our faculty and staff appreciated the opportunity to engage with these students. We also had a student experience committee consisting of students, faculty, and staff who are working hard to create virtual student experiences throughout the semester. Next slide. We conducted a couple of student pulse surveys this fall semester to obtain student feedback on how they are handling remote learning. We also held a student town hall a few weeks back so that students can ask questions directly from me, the provost, and our vice chancellors for student academic success and student affairs. And here's our main takeaways. Students want synchronous options for classes, for class discussions, to follow up on difficult subject matter, to hear questions from classmates that can help them understand material. Email does not always work and leads to additional questions. Now, some other students prefer asynchronous classes because they allow them to complete courses on their own schedules. But the bottom line is students want more interaction with faculty and fellow students, both in the class space and outside of it. They also want smaller recitation sections that we are able to provide for the large courses. Our recitation sections are roughly 35 students per section. That's probably still a bit big than what our students wanted to. So we're listening to them and trying to address them. They also want study spaces, the library, computer labs, research spaces. And we're providing them with these spaces. Last
Michael,
slide.
if you could plan to wrap it up maybe in the next
Yeah.
minute or so.
So here's my last slide. So for the spring, we're planning to be more in person, but our small campus size means we don't have a lot of options because we don't have a large number of large classrooms. We don't expect to have more residential students this spring as we had in the fall. We will continue to identify and share information about resources to our students. And I think from what we have learned, we really need the feedback from the students. And that's the only way to address the questions that they have, the concerns that they have, so that we can improve their student experience, moving forward. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Mr. Chair, we're right at 45 minutes. Could we go a couple of minutes over for a question or two?
Yes, you may.
So who would like to ask a question to any one of the presenters today?
I'd like to make a comment.
Go ahead.
Okay. It's just been truly amazing to see how effective and creative the Rutgers faculty, administration, and staff have been with our students. And also as a former educator, I can only say that I admire what has been done. I can't even imagine how challenging this was. And thank you.
Ron, it's Wilma. I have a question for Patricia. On the slide regarding the School of Health Professions, you had mentioned that the accrediting bodies were not accepting simulations in lieu of direct patient contact. How are we addressing that issue? Thank you. Great presentation.
Yes, that's where the double sessions are coming in, that as we're able to do the sessions and we move back into being able to do sessions, faculty are now having to work twice as many sessions in order to accommodate this. So it's been very challenging, but the students have not been shortchanged.
Thank you.
I have a question for Provost Monga.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, please.
You presented a very integrative sort of curriculum. Will you use some of these ideas moving forward post-COVID? Because it seems that it's actually working, particularly for your prison or different types of non-personal connections anyway. This is like a way to sort of help along the way to make those processes more suitable for both the sort of prison people and the students and the professors as well.
Right. No, thanks, Linda, for that question. So absolutely. So there has been, like, the VPVA example that I gave on virtual rooms. They found it very, very effective. And, these are the kind of things we would keep moving forward for the NJ step. The distance learning packets have been great because otherwise faculty would go in once, but then that was kind of it apart from minimal communication. And I think it has also opened up doors. Like I said, now earlier, the email communication was not permitted by the Department of Corrections, but now it is because of this, and hopefully they'll let it stay. Mm-hmm. And so I think there are new opportunities coming up. And if that email link stays in, then we'll be able to keep sending the distance packets and so on. So absolutely, we are hoping to leverage many of the learnings here and continue the good practices that have come up anew. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we can take maybe one more question. No.
Hey, Ron, it's Ron Wilson again. Question, in this difficult environment, are there any innovative things being done to determine if the students have mastered the coursework? Because it's kind of hard to do that right now. Are they doing anything different to determine that?
Is that for me or for anyone in particular?
No, any of the presenters.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just briefly say one thing and we'll see, we'll hear from the others too, maybe. But in my view, what faculty have learned through this is how assessment cannot be like just one big final exam or one big midterm. and how you break it down into different pieces where students have multiple opportunities to show their learning. So this is like, one of those aspects. Also in terms of not just having one format, if you were an instructor and in class you did like a multiple choice or something, but now people are looking at creative ways to assess learning, whether it's through more writing or things which, again, in a remote setting, we're also trying to be careful in terms of academic integrity issues. And so faculty have worked harder to come up with innovative ways to, assess the same content. And, again, like the question Linda asked, some of these good practices will hopefully continue.
I think we're going to have to stop there. I do want to thank all four of the provosts for these excellent presentations. I know we could go on longer. There are probably many more questions, but perhaps we can do another session at some point in the future on this subject. What you've really done, you've really crystallized for us the challenges you've been facing and really the challenges you've been overcoming. So thank you very much, not just for the presentations, but for the terrific work you are doing during these difficult times. Mr. Chair, I turn the agenda back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Garudi. And I have to echo the comments being made. And thank you all four provosts for these insightful presentations. I think Roberta said it best, but I think I speak for the rest of my fellow trustees and emeriti when I say that you have helped us today gain a better appreciation of all the tremendous efforts of the faculty to adjust to this environment and while continuing to provide an excellent Rutgers education. So thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, next on the agenda, we have a presentation from Mr. Garquero on plans for re-entry in the spring semester. Mr. Garquero.
Oh, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, I think what we're going to look at is something a little bit different. When the chair had asked me about doing something for on the spring, we actually have some excellent news as we move forward. And we're thankful to be able to present this because this really is the first time that we see some light at the end of this tunnel. So I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint here, a deck that only has about 48 slides, so it shouldn't take too long. This, as I said, is the first time that we see a path forward. This is, I will tell you that 3.5 to 4 weeks ago, we would have been unable to be able to make this presentation or to have the optimism that we have today as we start to see where this pandemic may finally have some type of an endpoint that we can begin to engage, re-engage our students properly. So let me get started. You all know that the current state, what it looks like. We've spent the last 10 months, that feels like 10 years for many, in an emergency response and mitigation and planning for the summer and planning for the fall, planning again for the spring that's coming up that will look, unfortunately, a lot like the fall that we just saw. Every one of these, of course, gets better and better. And you heard my partners, the provosts, talk about what's happening on each of the campuses. We're looking at our housing occupancy that's under 10%, about 1,800 beds out of our 19,000. We have about 253 face-to-face course sections out of 16,500. 8,500 of our staff are telecommuting, or about 65%. There's been a real human toll on our staff. Over 1,000 have been unfortunately laid off, and we've had to furlough over 3,700 people to date. And the numbers, if everything were to just be perfect as we roll into the next year, look like north of $180 million. And unfortunately, we know that everything will not be perfect. So where are we? We have a planning framework that really revolves around vaccines. It's the intersection of vaccine and where we want to be by the end of next year. So very timely, and it's incredible the progress that's happened around vaccines. And I have to say, even the confidence now built around vaccines. So all of you have been listening to the news. I know that you're up to date on much of what's going on, but I'm going to talk a little bit about it. As we move forward, of course, we would be in compliance with CDC and state guidelines, executive orders, administrative orders, mandates, statutes, all of that. There's no doubt. And much like the rollout that the New Jersey Department of Health has put on the vaccines in 3 phases, we are also looking at phases that intersect with those. As I look at this picture, I also want to do a shout out. You saw I said 65% of our staff are telecommuting. That leaves another 35%, or with our researchers, about 5,000 people that never left or came back very quickly. So we owe them a special debt of gratitude. They're our front line. They're our essential. These are custodians and police and clinical workers and prison workers and healthcare professionals, just to name a few. So vaccines, you all know we have one on the market, Pfizer. We have one that'll be on the market within the next few days, Moderna. We have another one that's in progress, AstraZeneca. We have great faith in what J&J might be bringing up in January. That's all very important. The 11 that are still in phase 3 clinical trials that'll be coming out, and the 55 more that are in either phases 1 or 2. So I will say that the critical piece or component to this is that supply chain and how that supply chain begins to fill in those 3 phases that we talk about. So essentially, the rollout of vaccine is made up of 2 pieces in its simplest form: distribution and logistics. The state of New Jersey is looking at inoculating approximately 70% of its eligible population, or approximately 4.8 million residents. That's what would get us to the concept of herd immunity, where the vaccine would find it difficult for a place to land. And that's right out of the CDC's playbook as well. And New Jersey, of course, has adopted that. We are in line to get about 2.77% of the eligible or whatever vaccine is, I should say, available vaccine. And that's prorated by the state's population, and the federal government actually does that. So Pfizer, first tranche, 76,000 doses that are being delivered to New Jersey. You saw that we started inoculating at University Hospital on Tuesday past. Those 76,000 doses actually will affect about 38,000 people. Pfizer requires 2 vaccines, 28 days apart. Moderna requires 2, 21 days apart. AstraZeneca could be 1 or 1.5. I'm not really sure at this point, and they're working through that data. And J&J looks like a 1 vaccine. So all of them are nuanced. All of them are a little bit different. And that takes us to the logistics, right? Storage, transportation, refrigeration, and administration. Pfizer needs to be stored and transported at -80, Moderna at -20. AstraZeneca is essentially refrigeration temperature, a regular refrigerator. Think about the transportation. Think about issues such as the chain of custody from the manufacturing plant or distribution center all the way to getting it into somebody's arm, the complications that go along with that, and what it takes by setting up the administration of that vaccine. If we look at things like who does it, where is it done, what's the IT infrastructure behind it, all of that needs to be worked out. I will tell you that the state has a number of task forces doing this, and they are doing yeoman's work. I have to give them a lot of credit. They've come a long way in a very short period of time, but as you can see from the previous presentations, we've all come a long way in a very short period of time. So I talked about the 3 phases, and this is the expectation in the state of New Jersey. Phase 1 has started, and phase 1 would go through the end of January. We're looking at about 2.5 million people that would be inoculated. It's broken into 2, 1A, 1B. Sometimes you might see a 1C, but it's 1A, 1B. 1A is healthcare workers and long-term residents of long-term care facilities. And then 1B is other essential workers, people at higher risk, and I'll show you what this looks like. People that are 65 plus. That would then roll into phase 2, February and March. We know that we're not going to inoculate in New Jersey 2.5 million people in phase 1. just as a comparison, for instance, during the flu season, New Jersey inoculates about 50% of its eligible residents. That's misleading. 73% are under the age of 17. When we had H1N1, we inoculated about 1.1 million people. So this is a heavy lift to get to that 4.8 million. Phase 2 would be the remainder of phase 1, and then beginning that general population, the other 2.3 approximate million residents. And then phase 3, April, May, is finishing up that phase 2 and open access for anyone who did not get in line, so to speak, or hesitated, or other populations, right? Because there's studies now, but nothing out about children. So we're still waiting to see what happens there. I know Pfizer's doing they're in a clinical trial with respect to that, a phase 3 clinical trial. We don't know about pregnant women. So there are other populations here that still need to be considered. But what is anticipated with a great degree of confidence is that by summer, we will have enough vaccine to inoculate anyone that wants to be inoculated. So can these phases slip into June? Yes, it can. It still doesn't stop the way that we would be planning for our repopulation. So what do those critical categories look like? When I talked about 1A, that's all the way to the left. You can see the different populations that make that up. When I talk about 1B, you start to look at the 3 columns running to the right, and that all falls into that phase 1. Where does this put us? So we're looking at serious planning to resume our operations for September. Now, when I say resume our operations, and I'll go through each piece of this, I want to be clear that what we are looking at is bringing back 100% of our community, but never more than whatever is allowable for us to bring back. So in other words, we may only have 50% at any given time, or 40 or 30 or 60, depending on what the guidelines are at that time. But touch points are on 100% of our community. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. December 2020 and January, we're socializing this message. I want to pause here for a second because I think it's critically important that everybody understand that this pandemic, this virus, has taken a toll that's both physical and psychological. So the physical toll, the illness, of course, someone who contracts it and winds up getting ill and is symptomatic and all of that. And then there's a phenomenal psychological impact that this has taken. You know, we have parents who now have become, and guardians who now have become working at home, who are teachers and doctors and nurses and playmates and all of those things that add a phenomenal amount of stress. People with pent up, cabin fever, even, so to speak. All of that takes a huge toll. People that are afraid, even when they don't even know that they're afraid. So my friend Francine Conway and I have talked about this extensively, and this is just as extensive as the physical attributes of catching the virus. So we want to get this message out early. We want to be transparent. We want everyone to understand, where are we going? Because there's a mentalization over the course of the next few months that starts to need to happen. I think as everyone starts to feel better and starts to see the differences, once the positivity rate starts to go down, everyone will have a little bit of a better feel for where the year is taking us. Our first quarter of the year, we're looking at developing detailed plans for repopulation for every department at the university, all 1,500 departments. The plans need to be scalable. They need to include provisions for things like rotating schedules, telecommuting, flexible schedules, staggered shifts, population management, and equity. That's where I talk about 100% of our community. The same thing needs to happen simultaneously. Our provosts are working with the deans and the chairs and their communities, and they need to maximize face-to-face courses of a certain number. They're looking at rotational remote as necessary. They're looking at scheduling, and this may have to be completely reinvented. And what scheduling looked like in 19 may not look like that in 21 or even in 22. Classroom utilization, you saw the good work that they are doing, and that's the work that they will continue to do. And then lastly, what are we doing in the summer? What are we keeping? What are we not keeping? What are we building on? We're looking at events. We're looking at camps. We're looking at conferences. We're looking at all of those things that we need to have an eye on as we move forward. April through June, and this coincides with our K-12 system starting to now wind down for the year. And it also allows us to look at and evaluate what we're doing right or what we're not doing right. So we're looking at a soft population, maybe 10% on that rotating schedule that I talked about. July through August, we want to bring back our population. I think we need to understand and make clear that, you know, we are not an online university. We are here to serve our students. We are here to give our students a college experience. We are built for collaboration. We are built to be able to feed off of each other. That's the way our university is built, and that's the way that universities that are not online are built. You can't do that without being together through some mechanism. And again, touch points of all 100% of our community, but never all together. So we're looking to resume our campus activities as allowable in the fall with face-to-face instruction, with residence halls, rebuilding our community, getting ourselves back up on our feet. I've often told our colleagues that, you know, the easy part was taking the university down and depopulating it. The hard part begins now. We have goals, we have milestones, we have places we can go to and look much, much different next year. So for all intents and purposes, I believe we're looking at a very much a 3-year deal. I think both professionally and of course personally, right? 21 being the 20 being the first year, and we know where we are. 21 is that year we start to kind of come back and put plans in motion that we can build on, continue to build on. 22 is the comfort level year, in my opinion. That'll take some time. And 23, we should be looking much like we looked in 19, except we're all going to be 4 years older. And with that, I think I'll stop there and take any questions, Mr. Chair, as you see appropriate.
Okay, so if anybody has questions for Mr. Caquero, please raise your hand. I'm going to ask Secretary Pasqua, Mr. Mulilo to kind of log them to start and get it in as many as we can. I see Ron Wilson, so Ron, go ahead.
Hey, Tony.
Yes.
If I'm a student, am I going to be able to be on campus in September of next year or in a dorm if I don't take the vaccine?
So we're working through that. You know, we're looking at what legally we can do and what legally we can mandate or we cannot mandate. So there's more to come on that. There's more to come on that.
Tony, Bob Mortensen, will each of the 3 campuses be in lockstep, or will they tend to vary from location to location?
So we walk together. The campuses are nuanced. Of course, most of what I actually showed you here does not really apply to RBHS because their classes are ongoing given the nature of the delivery of instruction that they do. But Chancellor Cantor, Chancellor Malloy, Chancellor Marsh, and I work very, very close together. And their provosts and Provost Mogi, we work very close together. They're nuanced. There'll be differences amongst the campus. Our goals are exactly the same. And we report out together. We do everything together as Rutgers.
Okay, I think I have Alan Cross that had a question. Alan?
Yeah, Tony, just to follow up on Ron's point, that there's going to have to be a lot of thought and coordination with you, with John, with President Holloway, whether students are going to be required to have the vaccination, whether residents, whether staff, whether faculty. It's a pretty, it could be a pretty contentious issue. And as you pointed out in your presentation, right now, a little only over half of people get a flu vaccine. So assuming distribution is okay, I think in September 2021, we're going to have to get really out in front of that and what we're going to do, because there are a lot of liability issues on both sides.
So there's just a little bit to that process. We'll talk about students, and I have learned a lot here. So these vaccines, so there are vaccinations that are required, but they're statutorily required. This would not be statutorily required. And interestingly, these are, of course, under emergency use authorizations. And there is a committee that I've learned of in the CDC, Brian, you can correct me if I'm wrong, AICP, that needs to make a recommendation as to whether students should be or should not be. If their recommendation is in the positive, then we can act on that recommendation in moving forward. So there's a whole process here that we need to go through. When it comes to faculty and staff, we do not have the healthcare workers aside, we do not at this point in time have the ability to be able to mandate something along those lines.
Ms. Patsa, Mr. Melillo, any other questions logged?
I do not see any right now, Mr. Chair.
Anyone, any other questions?
I have a question. My biggest concern is what if there are different visitors or guests that come on campus that have not taken the vaccine? What would Rutgers' procedure be for that?
So we're trying to get working with the state, right? We're close partners with the state. We're trying to get, and I think Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, even an entire educational process here surrounding vaccine. The key is going to be to get to that 70%. So will there be, and let me step back here too. So there will still be social distancing. There will still be face coverings. All of those things will still be in place. A little bit, testing, for instance, and these differences, testing to a very big degree protects the others, not really you. If you're positive, you're going to be positive, but you're out of there, and others are protected by you're not spreading to others and still being at work, for instance. Vaccines, you're really protecting yourself initially until enough people get the vaccine. So, we wouldn't be able to mandate visitors coming on campus. We won't even be able to mandate all of our faculty and staff, but we need to try to get to numbers that make sense, not just for us, but across the campuses as well.
Okay.
This is Jean Fox. I have a question. What are we doing about international students? I know that was a major, I teach at Columbia, I'm teaching, anyway, what are we doing with international? I'm concerned about that.
Gina, you're talking about vaccines, or you're talking about in general?
I'm talking about them coming back, and how are they participating, and do we expect they could be back like normal in the fall?
So we have our international students with us now. They've been here. They'll be here through the end of the spring semester. And, everyone that's living with us goes through a regular routine testing regimen. All of that is happening with them as it happens with everybody else. I don't know what the situation will be for September at this point. And some of that, I don't think any of us really know. If they stay with us, of course, they'll stay with us enjoying whatever program we have. If they leave and try to come back, that may be problematic unless the Biden administration changes some of what's set up by way of visa applications and those types of things. So if anybody else has any more info on that, but that's kind of as I understand it.
Thank you. I mean, they pay a higher tuition, which is why it's always helpful for the budget. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Gaquero, as always.
Thank you.
Okay, next section, we move on to the reports from the committees and task forces, starting with the Committee on Diversity, Inclusion, and Outreach. Dr. Sampson Landers, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a two-way situation here. Great, thanks, Mr. Chair. The Diversity Inclusion Outreach Committee minutes have already been included in our meeting book. So what I'd like to do is merely highlight some of the key points from those meetings. First, the committee has prepared talking point slides that consist of roles and responsibilities of the trustees, as well as the great things to know about Rutgers that we'll use in outreach efforts going forward. And thanks to Nimesh for developing those slides for us on the committee. Secondly, we discussed the trustees ambassador role for Rutgers. And in that role, as we all know, we are charged with helping to identify trustee candidates from professional, social, and also community groups that we engage with, in addition to from Rutgers affiliated groups. So those are just some things to remind us all about. The next thing we talked about were the few obstacles that we encountered with our outreach to the board members this year. And in response to that, the committee plans to create and communicate an actual timeline to enable an earlier outreach activity in the future with board members. So hopefully that will resolve some of the issues that came up there. For future outreach interactions with the various organizations, the Diversity Inclusion Outreach Committee members will gladly attend those meetings with you or appointments with you and present the talking points slide set. Our aim here is to provide assistance in identifying high quality potential board members in the organizations that you wish to talk to about them. So that was an area that we offered our assistance in. Then we discussed ways to expand our outreach efforts through building a repository document to track trustee affiliations that were collected from last year's assessment survey question. We'd like to think that that's a good way to at least start the process of developing this repository, and possibly recommend to the committee on assessment that they ask a similar question this year in the assessment survey, so that we can begin to add to that document affiliation information for future use. And then finally, although the nominations deadline for this year has already passed, as we know, at the end of November, trustee candidate pool for this year is really set. But the committee would like to encourage all of us to begin candidate identification through our network now for future years. And that concludes the brief report from the committee. If there are no questions, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Any questions for Dr. Sampson-Landers? No.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Sampson-Landers. Next, I call on Mr. Lau to present the report on of the Joint Committee on Investments. Mr. Lau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Investment Committee met on November 18th and December 15th, just a couple of days ago. And the committee has reviewed and endorsed several investment recommendations. They're all summarized on the board portal. In addition, we reviewed and approved our spending policy, which is also summarized on the portal. And finally, we received a very impressive presentation from 4 of the interns working in the endowment office. Just to summarize some of the numbers, the fiscal year, which ended on June 30th, and was also reported in Nakubo, was that our AUM for the endowment was 1.48 billion. And our 1, 3, 5, and 10-year performance numbers were 0.2% for the 1 year. And that, just as a reminder, that's as of June 30th, which included the market dislocations in March. The 3-year, 5-year, and 10-year numbers were 4.8% annualized, 5.3% annualized, and 7.5% annualized. And that includes both the long-term investment pool as well as separately managed funds. And again, those numbers are as of June. Since then, the long-term investment pool has grown quite a bit, over 5% through now. But I think we had it as another 4.8% in the quarter since up to November 30th. And finally, Mike Gower and I updated the Joint Committee on Investments on the ad hoc committee to review the merits of divesting from fossil fuel investments in the endowment and to provide a recommendation to the JCOI. So such a committee is spelled out in our divestment policy and was created and endorsed by this board and the Board of Governors in 2016. And this has been the first divestment request to go through the process. So that concludes my presentation, Mr. Chair, and I'll turn it back to you.
Any questions for Mr. Lau?
I don't see any, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lau. Next is the report of the Board Trustees Task Force on Legislative Engagement, and I will ask Mr. Duhane to provide the report.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate it. And thank you to the board for giving me an excuse to wear a tie and a jacket today. I haven't done that in many months, so I appreciate that. And thanks to Tony for that great report. The incredible logistics that the university is doing is just outstanding to see, and I think gives us all great confidence. And thanks to the comments from the provost earlier about the work the faculty is doing. I teach one class at Rutgers, and I can imagine what it's like to have a full course load teaching and many students, and it's great to see all the work that's been done. As far as the task force on legislative engagement, thanks to the chairman for his support throughout and joining our meetings, and to Nick, who chairs this with me, and to Dr. Garudi, who joins us, and Pete McDonough and his team, which do a great job supporting all those efforts. Just to remind people of the goals of the task force, it is not to create policy, but to position ourselves as advocates should the university need us. Really, the governor and the president of the university will probably talk on big policy matters. Our goal is to be there to improve and create relationships with the state legislature should we need them, should Pete or his team or the president of the university decide we need to advocate with legislators. We want to already have pre-existing relationships with them that we've built over time and have built a friendship and a trust with them without us having to ask for anything, so that when we do go and ask for something, we're not coming in cold. We're coming in and with relationships already between the trustees and the legislators. In 2019, our tactics were a little bit different than they are in the 2020-21 time. Last academic year, we met in person with all four legislative leaders, the Senate President, the Speaker, and the Republican leaders of the Senate and the Assembly. We invited a number of legislators to one of the basketball games, which was really great for them to get to see and feel that enthusiasm at the end. And then we had a planned academic site visit as well to show off, but that was postponed due to coronavirus. So it's changed us a little bit this year. So what we're doing this year is we've asked everyone, all the trustees, to participate in several touches with their local state senators and state members of the General Assembly. Our goal to do that is because every politician cares about who gets to vote for them, right? That's the commodity that's most important to them. And what we want to do is make sure they look at Rutgers not as some institution in New Brunswick or Piscataway or Newark or Camden, but as something that's localized to them. So what we're trying to do is introduce the legislators to their local trustees so that it's localized no matter where they are. And so what we've asked the trustees to do is participate in a mail program where we are mailing information to them. It's a very light touch. The first mailer was a letter to each of the legislators with Rutgers masks, which was great. The second was a booklet that had been prepared by Pete and his team with information about Rutgers. When we meet with legislators, we also localize it by giving them information about how many alumni they have in their district, how many employees the university has in their district. The whole goal is to really localize this for them so they see Rutgers as a presence in their district. So we've already met with the Senate President. We did that over Zoom. The Senate President was very helpful around budget time this year when there was a cut for higher ed. We met with him first because we wanted to express our gratitude for his support for Rutgers University and for higher ed throughout. He was great. Assembly Leader Bramnick has also agreed to meet. We'll also be meeting with Speaker Coughlin and Senator Tom Kane in the spring as well. We'll do all of those virtually. We do not plan to do any athletic event or an academic site visit this year for obvious reasons. If for some reason we can late in the year, that'll be great. But I think those will most likely be put off. So those events are TBD. We did have, I don't know if we can claim credit for this for the task force, but I'll try anyway. We did have in the class I teach, Governor Murphy came to speak to my class. Speaker Coughlin came to speak to my class. Minority Leader Bramnick came to speak to my class, as did former Governor Christie. So I think all of those touches ultimately matter to the board and to the university by continuing to show Rutgers in a good light for them. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Any question for Mr. Dehaene? Alan?
Mike, I just want to thank the job you and the committee have done. Personally, I've reached out with your guidance and Pete's guidance. I was on my state senator's Facebook presenting him a Rutgers book. I also got a thank you note from my one of my state assemblywomen. I'm not sure if it has anything to do that my district was the only district that had legislative elections this year, 25, but nonetheless, it's really been effective. And I just want to thank you for all the good work you've done.
Thank you. I've helped Senator Bucco for many years, so I'm glad to hear that he was responsive. I would have given him some grief if he wasn't responsive, but I really appreciate the participation. Over 2/3 of the trustees participated in these first two pieces, so thank you very much. It goes a long way. I know my assemblyman immediately took a picture of the letter I sent him and sent it to me just to make sure he knew that I knew that he got it, so he wanted to make sure he communicated that. So those things really matter for those who don't kind of work in politics. These contacts really matter. Having worked in a legislative office, when you get contacted by somebody prominent in the community, which all of you are by virtue of being on the board of trustees, it really matters, and they hear us. And should we need to use those relationships in the future because there's something important to the university, it's really going to matter. So thanks, Alan, for doing that.
I just wanted to say that Senator Shirley Turner also sent a thank you.
Excellent. That's great to hear.
Yes.
Thank you.
I asked her for an opportunity to sit and speak with her, but she didn't grant me that, but she did say thank you.
We'll take what we can get.
Yeah, there we go.
Any other questions or comments?
I do not see any.
I'm personal friends with Shirley Turner, Linda, so I will follow up with her and make sure she meets with you.
Oh, that would be awesome. No, seriously, I would love it.
Okay, well, that's what it's all about, trying to create those relationships. And like Mike said, this is an ongoing effort, and it's we need to continue it and strengthen those relationships as we go along. I do want to thank all the trustees who have participated in the Touch campaign. We'll do more of those, and the more of us that participate, the more responses we're going to get. And Mike, I think I said this in the task, but I did also get a personal note from my senator. So
that's great. That's great. And there'll be more of those in the spring.
Would it be possible, Mr. Chair, to get a list of the board members and the congressional districts, or the districts rather, in which they live, so that perhaps we could share and not be redundant in our communications?
Well, we like the redundancy. I'll just say that. So I would rather, if a senator gets 4 letters from 4 different trustees in the same district, I think it just adds more power and more repetition, just like any kind of advertising. So we actually like the redundancy.
I was thinking more of visits.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay.
But whatever works.
We can. I think. Look, we can take the question on the list and see when we resume business, because we don't see business resuming anytime soon. But as we move into next year. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Dehaene. Next, I would like to call on Ms. Papamarco to present the report of the Board Trustees Task Force on Philanthropy. Ms. Papamarco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. The Task Force on Philanthropy met 4 times this semester. We've shared a copy of the updated charge to the Task Force on Philanthropy and the minutes of our meetings in your board books. Please read through the charge, which includes our efforts to integrate President Holloway's Scarlet Promise Grant initiative announced July 1st. Team members have been working to create an action plan that includes a full communications and education plan that will guide us not only for this school year, it will become our future roadmap for task forces in the coming year. It includes, but is not limited to, additional one-pagers. If you recall, we had a great one-pager done with our partners at the foundation, speaking about Scarlet Promise Grant recipients, sharing their stories, talking points, easy to understand and share facts about Scarlet Promise Grants, and our board philanthropy initiative to share with trustees and friends of trustees. Trustee outreach. Members of the task force will be reaching out to each of you to answer any questions you may have on Scarlet Promise grants or our task force charge as we move toward Rutgers Giving Day in March. I believe it's March 24th. Not to be confused with Giving Tuesday, which just passed. We've also identified key partnership and engagement initiatives that include, but are not limited to, the Rutgers University Foundation, Trustee Emeriti, working with Mary DiMartino, the RUAA, an important engagement partner and friend of the trustees, and additional key stakeholders and partners for both education and engagement, including our student organizations. I'd also like to point out, if as you were listening to the provost speak earlier, you heard them, several of them mention, I think Newark in particular made 6,300 allocations in emergency funds. So Scarlet Promise grants go and are used for a lot of different things. And that's one of the ways that they can be used. I also remember that I think Camden mentioned that they used 230. So as you're thinking through some of the positives that come from Scarlet Promise grants, those are immediate and current and very tangible ways that we are contributing back to our students. With that, if there aren't any questions, I turn the floor back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Palmarco?
I do not see any.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Palmarco. Next, I would like to ask Ms. DiMartino to update us on the work from the Emeriti Outreach Group. Ms. DiMartino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, let me just say, it's great to be back. I don't think I had a chance to say that at the first meeting. So really, really nice to be back with you all. And as Jose mentioned, I'm working with other Emeriti on what we're calling the Emeriti Outreach Group, and that's Greg Bender, Jean Fox, Bob Eichler, and George Rears. And together, what we've done is met twice. Our group and our efforts are really around, outreach to existing active Emeriti, in particular around the Scarlet Promise grants, knowing that the Emeriti have already historically been supportive financially to the university, as well as in their own giving of time and talent, but looking to really outreach to them, to ask them about, their networks, to really continue to build on the work of this board and the university's effort around the Scarlet Promise Grant program. But this group is also looking to outreach to former board members as well. So we're going to look to broaden that. We did have a happy hour that, and George had promised to dress in his Santa suit. So we'll have to wait for next year for that. But we will reschedule that and look to get the Emeriti together and really bring this group and around Scarlet Promise grants, but also really to the extent looking ahead, other ideas that Emeriti have that are ways that we can collectively work with the board and other groups to really advance what's going on at the board and also at the university. So I'll finish there.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from Ms. DiMartino? Thank you. I do appreciate the work the Emeriti are doing to help us with Scarlet Promise grants. So thank you. It's good work. Okay, next is the report from the Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Gower, on the Audit Committee. So Mr. Gower.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Committee on Audit met on October 29th. Ms. Shelley Massey, the partner from KPMG, presented the committee with the draft of the university's financial statements for the year ended June 30th, 2020, as well as the required communications. I explained to the committee that the statements would not be final until we receive certain information from the state related to post-retirement benefits, and we were just notified that that information won't be coming to us till mid-January. So final release of the statements will be probably towards the end of January. Nonetheless, neither Ms. Massey nor I expect any substantive changes to the financial statements. So therefore, the committee agreed unanimously to accept conditionally the financial statements for the past fiscal year with Chair Heather Taylor having the authority for final approval of those when they are complete. Ms. Ruth Philo, the Chief Audit Executive, presented the Audit and Advisory Services 2021 Annual Audit Plan and received approval of that plan from the committee, which is a requirement to comply with standards from the Institute of Internal Auditors. In matters for information, Dr. Timothy Fournier, Senior Vice President for Enterprise Risk, provided the committee with a brief verbal update on the high-risk areas of data security and privacy, as well as foreign influence. Associate Vice President and Deputy Chief Enterprise Risk Management, Ethics and Compliance Officer, Eugene Simon, gave a series of presentations to the committee around the elements of an effective compliance program, as well as the importance of establishing such a program in order to reduce the risk of non-compliance with regulations and deter unethical behavior. Ms. Philo then presented on completed audit reports that have been issued since the last meeting, as well as ongoing follow-up efforts to close out past due recommendations. Mr. Chair, that completes my report.
Any questions from Mr. Gower?
I do not see any, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gower. Okay, next on agenda, we have a resolution to conduct a closed session on January 25th, 2020. I call on Mr. Lyle to present the resolution. Mr. Lyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Be it resolved that the board meet in closed session on January 25th, 2021 at 4 p.m. Eastern to discuss matters falling under the attorney-client privilege, specifically to receive legal advice on the Rutgers Act of 1956 and the Open Public Meetings Act in accordance with Chapter 231, Public Law 1975, Section 7, Item B7. Action related to these matters is not expected to be taken. Mr. Chairman, I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
No, I had a question. I'd like to know what the issues, the broad issues, the topics related to a current attorney-client privilege are before we vote on having a closed session about this. It's not clear to me what this is referring to, and I don't think we can possibly vote on it absent knowing the general topics at hand.
I don't mind answering this question.
Go ahead.
The meeting is just to simply give a primer on those laws, and in that sense, legal advice and guidance to the board as to how those laws apply to board action. There's no specific board action related, but it is to give legal advice and guidance on what those laws mean in the context of board governance.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Sure.
John, thank you for answering that question. I'm not sure I could have done it as well as you.
It's a practiced response.
Thank you. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Any old business? New business? Okay, before I call for a motion to adjourn, I would like to just take this opportunity to wish everyone safe and happy holidays. And I look forward to seeing all of you in the new year. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting, please?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Stay well.
Happy holidays.
Meeting adjourned.
Everybody, happy holidays.
Bye, everyone. Good seeing you all.
All right.
Bye.
Yeah, party,
Bye,
right?
everyone.